Hey, Wes here. Thanks for joining me today. I don't know about you, but one day I wake up and I think, you know what? I want to make a big pot. And then my next thought is, well, if I'm going to make a big pot, I need a big Puki. I don't have a Puki big enough for that. Person never going to have enough Pukis. And so I made this. This is a Puki that is easily 17 inches across, certainly as large as I will ever need it to be. And that's what this video is about. I'm going to show you how I made this thing. So let's get started. Here is the form, a large flower pot in inside dimension 17 inches. That will make a large Puki. What I have done, I've taken a more or less round piece of bed sheet. Put that over the top. I'm going to saturate this with plaster of Paris and let that firm up. I will need several layers of cloth and plaster to get a good firm Puki made. Ideally, if everything works right, I will get a kind of a natural curve and be able to create the profile for the Puki that I want. Seems to work best to put the water in and then sprinkle the plaster in the water. Now, if you followed the directions for making plaster of Paris, you will end up with a mixture that is just way too thick and clumpy for what we're trying to do here. The other thing is that you want to get it as consistent as you can. But you also have to work fairly quickly because this plaster will start to firm up. So this is pretty watery, but for my purposes, I think it is fine. I want to be able to saturate the cloth. And if it's too thick, it won't do that. And one thing that I found is that the cloth tends to fold over on itself, stick together kind of, so it's not that easy to deal with. And again, you're working kind of against the clock here a little bit. I've also found that it seems to work best to mix it up in a shallow bowl as opposed to like a bucket. Okay, let's see if we can get this thing draped over the flower pot. The more even we can make this, the better it will be. This can be a very messy job. You don't want to do it in a part of the house that is going to be an issue. So that's stretched out pretty good. Now I need to found that using a paintbrush works pretty good. So my plan is just, I think this is fine just the way it is. I don't think I want to mess with it. And it will take a day to harden up. Then the goal here is to put more layers on. Once it starts firming up though, you just aren't going to do much with it. Now, the other thing is make sure that you clean up your equipment fairly quickly. Once it all hardens up in your paintbrush and bowl and so on, you have a bigger cleanup mess. This has sat overnight and it's relatively dried out, but it's just a thin sheet, so it is really just too thin to have the structure that we want and need to build it up. The last one I made is maybe 1/4 of an inch thick to give it the rigidity that you need. So I'm going to have to put a few more layers of cloth, and I could use sheets, but they are really thin. Actually, I ended up cutting up a pair of jeans, and so the denim is heavier, and I'm going to have to make 2, 3, 4 layers to get this as rigid as I wanted. So that's the next step, is to soak these in plaster of Paris and build in the next layer. Also found that if I have pieces, I don't end up with as many bubbles in it, although I think I have more pieces here than I really need to have. I don't want those seams to overlap very much either. Hopefully I calculated this about right. Day 3, the second layer is firmed up. It's still damp, but it's fairly firm. So two thoughts. One, the denim works really well. I like how heavy it is and absorbs the plaster well, so I think that's a good choice. All these pie shapes, not a great idea. It makes it lumpy. It's very hard to keep it smooth. But I'm going to put some other layers on it. So I've got some other larger pieces of denim. And it works good to have pieces. One large piece is a little hard to handle. But I've got 3 pieces that'll fit together here. And so let's put on another layer and get that going. I'll let this sit till tomorrow. It'll firm up, and then one more layer I think will probably do the trick. This has been drying for several days. The saturated denim has taken a long time to dry out, but that's okay. But it's kind of hard like a drum. It's not totally dry. So a couple things. I need to get it off of the flower pot, and it's not as smooth as I want. And I'm thinking, although I may be wrong, that if I take a sander to this, I can smooth it out and then maybe do another layer of cloth for the final project. All right, this is ready to come off now, I think. So here we go. So it's a little bit flexible still, but it's pretty firm. So it's going to need another layer of cloth for sure. And I don't know how well you can see this, but it's pretty lumpy, and that really needs to be cleaned up. So hopefully the sander will do a trick. I do want to say that with plaster of Paris, any kind of clay, things that have particulates, wearing a mask, a dust mask of some sort, a respirator, good idea. At the very best, this is neutral. At the very worst, this is hard on your lungs. So be careful out there. I think it is better, but is not as good as I would like to be. So I have to kind of work on some other solutions. Well, the experiment continues. I think it helped to do some sanding, but it didn't do a complete job. And it's hard to say what's the right thing to do, but what I've done is I've mixed up some more plaster, and I'm just going to pour it in here and see if that will act as a bit of a leveler. Recognizing it may ruin the whole project, but we'll see. We'll just let this dry at least overnight and see what happens next. So I've sanded some after pouring in that coat of plaster of Paris, And that really does seem like it smooths some things out. It's better. It's not as good as I want it to be, but it is definitely better. So I think what I'm going to do is pour on another coat of thin plaster of Paris, sand that one more time, and then hopefully put on the final coat of cloth that will finish all of this off. So it has taken shape, but it has taken much longer than I ever imagined. It doesn't take a whole lot of time to build this thing, but the drying periods are days between each step. But so far, so good. Since the last segment, what I've done is I poured additional plaster of Paris in here and then used sandpaper to sand it smooth to get some of the dips and undulations out of it. I'm not quite done. I think I need to do one more and then put on a final coat of cloth. The dry plaster of Paris really absorbs the wet plaster really quickly. So you have to work kind of quickly. But it seems to work well. I've put in 3, maybe 4 thin layers of plaster without any cloth and sanded it down. So it's reasonably smooth, although I have a few little bumps here and there. And then so my plan is to put in one more layer of cloth. Hopefully that will be it. And then trim around the edges here. And hopefully I will be done. It seems the trick with doing this with a cloth is to make sure that your plaster mix is pretty thin so it doesn't get all clumpy. My goal here is to not get too many creases in it. Paintbrush seems to help quite a bit. What I'm trying to do here is saturate the cloth. It's starting to harden up a little bit, so I've got to be careful not to create lumps. Okay, that actually worked out better than I thought it would. At least so far so good. Well, I am satisfied with the surface here. It's not perfectly smooth, but it's pretty good. And so all I have to do now is trim around the edge, get a good clean edge, and seal that up. So I have here kind of a Dremel-like tool, and I'm thinking that that will work. So let's give it a try. So I have to work at it a little bit, but I think that's going to be just fine. Here's the Puki. It has sat for a couple days. It's pretty dry, but not quite there. And I'm pretty happy with the way that it looks. The last thing to be done is to deal with these edges. They're kind of soft. And what has happened with me in the past is little bits of plaster of Paris slough off and they get in your clay. That can cause spalling, so that's no good. So I need to seal up the edges, and there's probably some different ways to do that. But what I have decided to try is use some water-resistant wood glue to paint on the edges. And I've taken some of that glue, I've thinned it out with some water so it spreads on a little bit easier. And I'm going to give that a try and see how it works. So you can see that the parts are kind of delaminating a little bit, and that's okay. But putting some glue on there hopefully will hold all that together. Well, the project is done. The glue on the edge, that worked well. It dried and was real hard, and I had to sand the edges to smooth it out a little bit. But otherwise, I think that seals it up really well. So in retrospect, I'm really pleased with how this all worked out. I like using plaster like this, and there's several advantages, I think. One, it's really scalable. You can make big Pukis like this, even bigger if you really wanted, or smaller. It seems to work pretty well. I like that it's absorbent, so when you put clay in this, it's not going to stick like you would with, say, glass or something like that. It's pretty easy to work with. You can sand it down and smooth it out if you want. And it's lightweight. This whole thing is maybe 1/4 of an inch thick, and I think it's going to be real durable. If this was a clay Puki, I would always worry about it cracking and breaking and so on. So I think it's going to meet my needs really well. Now, I think a downside is that if the plaster sloughs off and gets into your clay, it could cause spalling, and that's a serious issue. What you could do is line the inside of the Puki with some cloth when you make your pot and create some separation, and I think that would be maybe a good idea in some cases. You have to decide about that. Some lessons learned. One, using more liquidy plaster gives you a little bit more control so it doesn't start thickening up too quickly. Using stretchy material that is more knit as opposed to woven, I think is better. I started off with a sheet, and that's a woven thing, and it had some creases in it, and partly that's experience of working with this stuff. But I ended up using one piece of cloth that was from a knit shirt, and it was stretchy, and I didn't have any creases at all. I did like using the denim because it's thicker. It added more thickness to this more quickly. It's very absorbent, but it's not particularly stretchy, so you have to use it in pieces. Although those pie-shaped pieces, that was not a great idea. All those seams just cause more difficulty. I was able to fill those in with plaster, and that worked pretty good. That might not be necessary if you use stretchy material all the time. But the nice thing with this plaster is that you can sand it down and smooth it out. Be a little bit careful about the mess and certainly about breathing those particulates. That is an issue. Now, I did make another video when I made this one. This is also made out of plaster. It was done as a hump mold. Different process. The end result was okay. This is better, easier. I think it's the better way to go. But I'll put a link to that video in the end. So I think that is pretty much it. Good project, and I'm looking forward to actually building a very large pot. That's going to be even a bigger challenge. So thanks for joining me. Thanks for the comments and all those other things that really does make a difference. Until next time, this is Wes, wishing you health, happiness, peace, and love. Take care. Bye-bye.